What's up, guys? So in this 14th tutorial on Xamarin Android, we are going to shift some gears and we're going to be looking at animations. And in particular, we're going to look at a couple different ways to animate views in Android. Okay? And in my opinion, animations are very important and sometimes can be overlooked when developing applications because they seem to not give so much to the actual application and what it actually does. But in my opinion, it gives a lot more of a modern look, and users have come to expect a modern UI that reacts to them and flows. And it would be something that wouldn't be good if you had basically a view that a user touches and then it goes away and disappears and appears somewhere else, or it kind of blocky and it doesn't really, you know, animate. So I mean, the fact that you can get a smooth animation, which a lot of apps now have, is basically come to be expectant of users that are used to seeing modern UIs. So it's definitely becoming more and more important to making your app look professional and flow. So here's a little example of what we're going to be working on. And as you can see, we just have a normal list view that set up with a list view adapter, and this is all set up already. And I will have a project that is with a link that starts right here, and then I'll have another link that's our finished product. So if you want to download each one, but if you really want to follow along, you can get the one that's going to be Xamarin Android 14 before, and another one's going to be done, Xamarin Android 14 done. Okay, so this is the before. This is where we're going to start off at, and this we have a list view, and we have basically a few things inside of it. Okay, and we're going to be animating this list view to go down and make a edit text visible, so that when the user wants to search a list view, they will be able to. Okay, and this is how it's going to look. All right. And when they click on it, the keyboard will come up, and if they close it while the keyboard's up, that will close off automatically as well. That'll close this, then shut the keyboard down. Okay? So that's what we're going to be working on in this tutorial. So let's get started with that. Okay? Close that. Now the first thing we want to do is we want to come into our main AXML file. And in here, we're going to want to actually add the edit text to it. Okay, so right now we don't have any kind of edit text in here. We just have a container basically with a linear layout, and we have another linear layout that stacks all these in a horizontal orientation. Okay, and then we have a view that's basically just a underline, and then the actual list view that you guys saw earlier. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with that. So we want to add a text or an edit text. Okay, and the way we can do that is go down here and let's just add it here. You want to give it an ID. We'll call it ET for edit text search. The next thing we want to do is give it some layout parameters. So we're going to want to wrap content, and then we're going to want to have it match the parent. So we're going to want to fill the screen vertically or horizontally, I'm sorry. All right, and the next thing we want to do is we're going to actually want to set the background and style it a little bit. Okay, and the way we do that is, if you remember, we have a styled edit text style XML file over here, and we went over this before, so I'll provide that in the start. That way we can just simply set its background to this, and that'll go ahead and style it for us. So give it that green border, make it a little bit more of a oval shape instead of a square. Do some things there. Okay, and then we want to set the actual hint, and the hint is something that comes up as a gray text inside of the edit text, and as soon as the user clicks on it, it goes away. So it's just indicating what they should do there. Okay, and then it'll disappear automatically and take care of that for us when the user enters in the edit text, okay? And then we simply just want to set the text color, and we want to set it to black, okay? So when the user is actually typing in, it'll show up as a black text, all right? And it looks like we're getting an error there. Okay. Guess I erased that. All right, so now we have our edit text, okay? And you can see it behind there, okay? And we're actually gonna set it to be, its alpha to be nothing, so it's essentially invisible, but still there. And then we'll have it smooth in when the list view is scrolling down, okay? So it'll fade in and out as the list view scrolls up and down, okay? So that's all for that. We now have our edit text. So the next thing we want to do is we want to go into our main activity, and we want to grab a reference of that edit text, and we'll call it search. And while we're at it, we're actually going to want to grab a reference to our container. And the container is just something that is currently holding the linear layout, which is all of these titles, the borderline, and the list view, okay? So we're gonna animate that so that everything comes down with it, okay? And that's all that container is doing. And so we want to grab a reference of it in code so that we can animate it, okay? So we're gonna need a couple more variables, but I'm gonna wait until we actually need them to create them. That way, you have a better idea of why we're gonna need them, okay? So when we went in that situation, we're gonna need a couple more variables up here. They're gonna be some booleans, okay? But for now, we are good. Now let's get a reference of the edit text using the normal way. And we called it ET search. It's not coming up here because we first want to, it's probably going to need to rebuild. So as soon as we rebuild it, it'll show up. We'll do that here in a second. And then also let's do the same thing, but for the container that we are going to animate. Okay, so let's go ahead and rebuild this so that it recognizes our edit text and the AXML file. All right, so we rebuilt, everything's good. Now the first thing we're going to want to do with this is we're going to want to set its alpha, the edit text's alpha, to 0, okay? And that's essentially making it invisible, okay? So there's alphas take any value between 0 and 1, 1 being the most and 0 being the least. And what it does is that's changing that value basically gives it the illusion of fading in and fading out, okay? Now the next thing we want to do is we want to actually create an animation class, okay? So with that, what we want to do is we want to come over here and we want to add a class, all right? Because there's a couple different ways that you can animate, and there's actually multiple ways you can animate in Android. And there's one of these ways is it's inheriting from the animation class, okay? So we'll call our custom animation my animation. And the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to inherit from the animation class, okay? Go ahead and import that. And we're going to want to have some constructors. First, we're going to need the view. And this is going to be the view that's passed in that we're actually going to animate, okay? Next, we're going to want something that's called the original height, okay? And what we're going to do with this is it's going to keep track of the actual original height before the animation started, okay? Then we're going to have another integer that's going to keep track of the target height, which is the height that it needs to go to, okay? And then we're going to have a grow by, okay? So which means how much is it going to grow by or shrink by if it's negative, okay? Next, we're going to want to create a constructor. And the constructor is going to take the view that's being animated and the target height of that view. Okay? So here we're just going to set some variables. Just going to want to set our global variables. the original height is going to be view.height. So before we manipulate it, let's grab the height. So that'll be the original height, okay? And the target height, which is specified in the constructor. And then the grow by is just going to be the target height minus the original height, okay? So basically if this is a height of 1000 and this height is 900, the original, then 1000 minus 900 is 100, so it needs to grow by 100. And the same also applies to if this is less than original. So if this is say 800, but the original height is 900, where they're going to have negative 100. So grow by is going to be negative 100, which is actually going to shrink the view, okay? And the reason why I'm showing you guys this is just one way to do it, okay? There are many ways to do it, and I want to show you a couple different ways. So I'm using one way to animate the height, and I'm using another way to actually translate, to actually move the position of the list view, okay? Of the actual container. So the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to override apply transformation. And this is very important. This is what actually is called a few times for every time that the view is animating, okay? So this one's really important. Make sure to override this. Now here's where we actually set the layout parameters. So we're going to manipulate the height in this case, okay? So this is what we're going to want to animate, the height. And we're going to cast it to an int. So the first we need the original height, okay? Plus grow by times the time. Okay, so this is the value that's going to change and make the magic happen. And at first, initially, it'll be 0. Okay, so the height will be original height plus, and then this times 0 will be 0. So this will be just the original height. But as this value changes, it'll go from 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, and as it does this, this will get larger. And therefore, if this is 100, well, then 100 times 0.2, which is 0.2 of the amount of total time, then this will be 20. So this will be original height plus 20. And then the next time it'll be 30. The next time it'll be 40 or 41, and it'll give you that animation effect. Okay, because this applied transformation method is called multiple times. All right, and then finally we need to request layout. So we're basically saying by requesting the layout that something has changed and that the view has been invalidated, which we'll call it which will make it draw itself all over again. Okay, so every time this is called, it'll keep drawing itself. So this is very important as well. Okay, and the last thing we want to override is something called will change bounds, and we want to return true on here. All right, and that's all for this class. Okay, so we'll come back to it just to explain it more, but basically for any of the code, this is all that we need to do. All right, so let's go back into our main activity. And if you notice in the actual, I'll bring it back up, in the application that I showed you that we're aiming towards, you might have noticed a search bar or a search icon up here at the top. And when that's clicked is when it actually pulls down the edit text. Okay, so we need to create that. Okay, we need to actually bring that up and inflate it onto the action bar. And then next we're going to want to actually provide a click event so that it knows what to do when we're clicking on it. All right. So in order to do that, we actually already have our action bar XML file, which essentially all it does is inflate it, or saying that it wants it on the action always, and then uses the icon that was provided in the Java folder. Okay, and this will be all here for in the start folder. This will be all set up for you guys. Okay, so what we need to do is we want to override a method called on create options menu. Okay, and if you for those of you guys that are familiar with Android, this is common ground. Nothing really too different here with how you do this. Okay, just a few things that are syntaxed differently. So when you come into here, we want to use a menu inflator, and we want to inflate our action bar view, okay? And the way we do that is we do resource, menu, and then there's our action bar XML file, and we want to pass in the menu that is passed to us, okay? And that's literally all we need to do, okay? So when we run this, we're going to have the action bar is going to be now visible, okay? But it's not going to do anything. And let me go ahead and show you that. But it's not going to do anything. So we're going to be able to click on it, but it's not nothing going to happen. That's because we haven't registered anything with it yet, okay? So let me show you guys that. Okay, so we have our search bar, our search button, but it doesn't do anything, okay? So in order to fix that, we need to override another method. And once again, for those of you guys that are used to Android, nothing really is different here. But I do want to show it just because since we're in the situation, it's a good time just to show this, okay? So it's common to use a switch case for this, because what we do is we grab from the item that's passed into us, we grab the item ID. Okay? And let's just create a default. And then with the default, we're going to go ahead and we're going to return the base method. Pass it in the menu. I'm sorry, the item. All right. However, for our case, we're going to check for another case. We're going to check to see if the case for when the resource ID is search. Okay? And that's what we're going to do here. So we want to make sure that the search has been clicked. So we'll put that. Search icon has been clicked. And remember, we're using search because that's the name that we actually gave it here. Okay? So here we want to do a few things. So this is where we're actually going to animate, okay? And we're going to use two different kind of animations. The one that we created ourselves, and we're going to use the view property animator that's built into Android. Okay? So first thing we're going to want to do is let's animate it down first, okay? So let's instantiate an instance of our my animation class. And then we're going to want to pass in the view that we're going to animate, okay? So we're going to want to pass in the list view. And then we're going to want to set the target height, which is list view's height minus the height of the search view, okay? So we want it to actually shrink by the height of the search. And that makes sense because we're going to move it down, but we also want to shrink it, because if we don't do that, it's going to move down, but that means that a part of it's going to be off the screen. So then the user won't be able to access it. So to remedy that, what we do is we want to actually shrink it, and at the same time it's moving down, it's also going to shrink so that the full list view is still on screen. Okay? Next, we're going to want to set the actual duration, okay? And we're going to set that this is in milliseconds. So let's set it to 500, so half a second. All right. And then list view dot start animation. And this list view, all the views have this start animation method. Okay? So that's not something that we wrote, it's just there. And we want to feed it our animation, okay? So notice that it takes an animation, and since we derived from animation, this will suffice, okay? Next, we want to basically wire up a method, okay? And notice here we have three methods: end, repeat, start. So we want to know when the actual animation started, okay? So the way we do it is plus equals, and Visual Studio will go ahead and generate a method that basically will be called when this fires, okay? And this will fire when the actual method or the actual search button is clicked, okay? So let's call it something a little different than what it did. We'll call it animation start down, since we're going to have two animations, start down and up, and then Let's change it accordingly here. All right. And then in this, what we're going to want to do is right now we're not going to want to do anything. Let's just wait. But for now, we'll just leave it blank. So that way we have it already wired up. And then the last thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to actually move the whole container, which remember the container is just a linear layout, okay? And this is where we actually use the view property animator, okay? The built-in thing that Android supplies. So what we do is animate, okay? And notice that gives us back a view property animator, okay? So now that we have the view property animator, we have a few different methods that are used for different animations. We can scale it, we can rotate it, we can translate it, which is move it, and there's a few other ones, okay? So we're worried about translation. And in general, and actually a lot of people want to translate Y, so in the up and down. And we want to do Y by. So Y is 2, so this would be like translate it to 0.400, you know? But Y by is by this much, so 100. So Y by 100, no matter where it's at, okay? And that's the one we're going to be using right now, okay? So we want to translate it by the negative amount of search height, which basically means that we want to move it down because of the negative, the amount of how high, I'm sorry, the height of the search bar, okay? And this makes sense because if we didn't do that, then it would move down, but not enough or too much. So this will ensure that it moves down just enough, okay? The next thing we want to do is we'll set the duration, which we'll also set to 500, and we'll start the animation, okay? So we have an animation that starts here, and then we have another animation that starts here, all right? And finally, we want to return true. And we'll actually do that. Let's do that here for now. So we'll return true. And that's because it expects a bool to be returned in all cases. Okay? So let's go ahead and run this and let's see what happens, okay? All right. Okay, we got it moving up for some reason. And that's why. Okay. So mistakes do happen, guys. And I hope you'll forgive me. But what I did was negative, which actually means I was wrong. So I was kind of a little disorientated there. Negative means that it's going from negative, so it's getting closer to the up position because 0 is at the very top. So if it's over here at 100, if you minus it, then it's going to go up. It's going to get closer to the top, okay? So that's actually something we're going to want to do. We move up, and all we got to do is simply change that, and everything should be working properly now, okay? I apologize, guys. Okay, but do notice that when we keep clicking it, it just keeps going down and down and down and down. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we want to click it to where it's going to move back up. So it's always going to stay in this range. All right, and it'll just keep going down. All right, so let's go ahead and stop it. So with that, we want to add another parameter, a global parameter up here. All right, so with this, we want to add a bool that, let's call it animated down. Okay. So what this guy is going to do is basically pretty simple. It's going to see whether it's down or up. And if it's down, move back up. If it's up, move back down. Okay? And that's all that's going to do. So before we execute this code, let's first check to see the state of what the animation is. So is it list view down or is it up? All right. So if, let's see, animated down. And let's see, if it's not animated down, that means it's up. Okay, so we want to execute the code that we wrote over here. All right, otherwise, we'll say list view is up, and then otherwise list view is down. All right, so we basically want to do the same exact thing in this case, but we want to do the opposite. All right, so that's pretty simple. All we need to do is copy and paste this code and then change these values right here. So we want it instead to move to shrink, we want it to grow. And now we want to actually hit this a negative, so then it moves back up. All right, so let's try that. The next thing, the last thing we want to do before we move on is we want to toggle this Boolean. So, because if it never changes, then it's always going to be in the false, or it's always going to be in the true, either or. So we want to toggle it. So whatever it was, we want to set it to the other expression. So if it's true, set it to false. If it's false, set it to true. Okay, and that'll basically toggle between the two. All right. Let's go ahead and make sure that everything is working properly as we expect. All right. Okay, so notice that everything is good. However, when we close it, the keyboard doesn't go down, and we also don't see the edit text. It's there, but we don't see it. And that's because of the alpha that we set to 0. It's essentially invisible, like I said earlier. So we want to have it smoothly fade in as this is scrolling down, or fade out as the list view is scrolling up. Okay, so that's the next thing that we want to work on. All right, so here we come back to our event, our animation start down, okay? And the first thing we want to do, see, animation start down. Yeah, so the list view is moving down. So then we want to basically have the search bar or the edit text fade in, okay? And the way we do that is we're also going to use the view property animator, okay? And then instead of doing the translation like we did, we're actually going to do alpha by, okay? So this is going to apply to the alpha. And we want it to move up to 1, okay? So we want it to be fully visible, all right? And here we'll set the duration to 500. And we'll have it start, all right? And then let's do the same thing, but for when it moves back up, all right? So this is when it moves back up. So we copy and pasted this. So it's going to be the same code. So what we want to do is actually do this plus equals, let's see, actually it'd be easier if we just copy and pasted this. And instead of start down, we say start up, okay? Because this is called when it's moving back up, all right? So let's go ahead and copy and paste this name and apply it to here. All right. So when it's starting down, this gets called, and when it's moving back up, this gets called. And all we need to do here is you need to set this to negative. Okay. So that'll make it slowly fade out. All right. As it moves back, the search bar is going to slowly fade out. And let's set this to 300 because I noticed that it does take a little longer to do that. So let's set it to 300 so it happens a little quicker. That way, it's almost faded out by the time that a list view is almost up, okay? And you could play around with these numbers, of course, and make it faster or make it slower. But these are just some numbers that I've seen that work well, okay? Let's go ahead and run the code and make sure that what we aimed for is working. And I like to do this. I like to keep running the code. I like to see my small changes, because if you wait too long, then you got a whole bunch of changes. And if something goes wrong, you don't know what you wrote, what code you wrote that made it go wrong. So this is just a good habit that I like to practice. All right, cool. All right, so notice that the fade in and notice the fade out. But that's my next problem. Look, see how if I keep clicking, I can screw up. If I just keep messing with this, I can screw up the list view. It starts to move up, or it might move back down, and it moves out of position. And that's because while it's animating, the user can click again and basically animate it again. So, and it screws up the prior animation. Okay? So that leads us to our next problem. What we want to do is we want to remedy that. We want to, while it's animating, we don't want the user to be able to keep animating. We can let them click, but we want to know when we're animating. That way, nothing happens while in between an animation, and it won't mess up the position of our list view. Okay? So let's go ahead and move on to that. And with that, we want to add a second bool, and we'll call it isAnimating. All right? And isAnimating will basically toggle on and off, okay? So start down, we'll make it true. So while it's starting down, M in isAnimating will be true, okay? And then here, we'll also make it true. Okay? And with that, we want to be able to set it to false, okay? So we want it to be able to set it to false when it's done, all right? So with that, it's very convenient because we do have an event that's called animation end, okay? So let's wire that up. So this means that animation end, we'll call it animation and down, okay? Remember to move that down here. So this animation will get called when it's moving down and it's finished, it will get called. And all we want to do is we want to set it to false, which says that, okay, it's no longer animating, all right? And we want to do the same thing, but for when it's moving up, okay? So end up, change it here. And we also want to set this to false. Okay, so when it's moving up, when it's done, this will get called, and this will be set to false. All right, but now that we have these flags now, but when we use flags or anything like this, it doesn't really matter if we don't check for them. So we are setting them the correct way, but we're not checking for them yet, okay? So let's go ahead and make sure that we're doing that now. And the easiest way to do that is basically to come up here, and we have, before all of our code, when the search button is clicked, we just checked for M. So is it animating? And if it is, then we want to return. Okay? So if it is animating, it will basically stop, and it will not execute any of this code. All right? Let's go ahead and run it and make sure that it's no longer messing up and moving positions that we don't want it to move. All right, so here we are. And let's go ahead and keep clicking it. And notice that even when we click it, while it's animating, it finishes its animation and then continues the next animation. So no longer is it moving in and out of place. Okay? So our flags are working really well. Okay. Let's go ahead and stop that. And the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to shut the keyboard down when the user closes. Because if the user closes and moves the list view up, the keyboard stays up. Okay? So we want to be able to basically stop that from happening. All right? And the way we do that is in the end up, we want to close the keyboard. And if it's not open, that's fine. But if it is open, it'll close it. And we also want to clear focus, okay? And we do that because clear focus is for the search bar. When it's in focus, it'll highlight the border green on the search bar. If we close it, there's basically no more focus. But if we open it back up, it's still going to be green like it is in focus. So it's going to be a little misleading, okay? So when the user closes it, we want it to entirely lose focus, okay? And that just makes sense. Next, we're going to want to actually close the keyboard when the animation is done, okay? And the way to do that is a little weird, but it does work fine. And we want to use the input method manager. Okay, let's go ahead and import that, and we'll call it input manager. And we're going to need to cast it. Okay, and we'll do this dot get system service. Okay, and with the context type input method service. Okay, so that'll return us an input manager. All right, and now that we have that input manager, we can call it hide soft input from window method, and then with that we want to feed it a parameter window token. Okay, and we want to give it a flag, which is hide soft input flags dot, and we'll want to select not always. Okay, so we don't always want to hide it, we just want to hide it right now. Okay, so that should work. Let's go ahead and make sure that it's working properly like we expect. Okay, so here we are. It gains focus and we close, and it loses focus. And then notice that when we reopen it, the border is a light gray, which is when it's not focused, and so that means that it's clearing focus as it should. Okay. Okay, so there we have it. This is the finished product that you guys saw in the earlier in the tutorial. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do in the next tutorial is we're actually going to use some .NET Link. So for those of you not familiar with Link, it's a great tool used for IE numerals, and using it with Android is great. So I mean, you really get to mix in the power of .NET with Android by using Link. And I always try to use it in Xamarin because Link's a great feature in .NET, and you can use it inside of Android. So you really get an advantage by being able to use Link for your list and to filter stuff and all that stuff. So we're actually going to implement a search with this search bar. Who would have thought? And I'm going to show you how to do that using Link. So that's something that's specific to .NET. So I think that's really important to go over with that. Okay. And I also am getting some requests for some REST services, and I'm going to be working on that soon. And that's great, guys. I love when you guys give me requests and give me ideas, because I do run out of ideas, and I don't really know what someone might be looking for or what audience exactly to target. So the more ideas I get, the more ideas that you guys send me, the better. I really love hearing from you guys. It really makes me feel good when I know that I'm helping you guys out, and I see the thumbs up and the comments, and I'll always do my best to try to help you guys out as much as I can, because this software is really great, but what is it if you really can't use it? And I've gotten many over the year. I've gotten much help using this software, and the people that have helped me, I wouldn't be there I wouldn't be here without it. So just yeah, you guys, just if you guys just comment and let me know what you guys are looking for, and any way, it feels great to hear from you guys. So enough from me rambling, and the next tutorial we'll go ahead and look into Link and searching. Okay, so as always, thanks a lot, guys, for watching.